OBS. When was all the explosions going on around?
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna record again.
How do you vote?
LT, I think? What is up, guys? Justin here. I'm taking over for the day. Since yesterday Jack did his story, I decided that I might as well do mine. So Jack talked about how he got into Chapman and why he chose television writing and all that. And I decided I might as well do the same thing. I'm gonna talk about why I chose Chapman, how I got into animation, and basically everything in between. So let's begin. So basic summary of who I am. I'm from the Bay Area. I'm from Morgan Hill, California, which is 15 minutes south of San Jose. And I come from a school called Antisabrado High School. It's your typical school. It sucked at sports. It was pretty good at academics and all that. And it was a nice place to be, pretty safe. But here at Chapman, I'm a digital arts student, so how did I get there? So I first found animation after playing a little game called Minecraft. Everyone knows what Minecraft is. It has that voxel type of style. So I found animation by joining this website that's based around the server that I played on. That website was basically just a message board for players to talk to each other and all that. And on the message board I found something called renders, which is basically composited and processed images made from 3D animated programs. And so these renders were mostly based around Minecraft, and I liked the style and all that. And so I asked around and I found a nice little program called Cinema 4D. And then I used Cinema 4D to get exposure in making renders and all that. And I eventually started making art for the players on the server and YouTubers and all that. And then I eventually branched out to doing low poly and hyperrealism environments. All this animation stuff happened in between like my freshman year and my senior year. I really enjoyed animation and all that, but since I'm Filipino, there's a stereotype in my family. For Filipinos, it's expected that you would go into like the nursing industry or like the comm sci industry for some apparent reason. And then even though it's a stereotype, it ended up being true in my family, with half the women on my dad's side actually being nurses. We begin the part of how it was hard for me to decide whether or not I want to go on the path that is stereotypical for a Filipino, or if I want to go on the path that I wanted to do myself. Since I was young, I've always had a problem of my parents and my grandparents expecting stuff out of me that I didn't necessarily want to do. And then that stems from the Filipino stereotype of nursing or science and all that. And then as a child, I always said I wanted to be something like an engineer or a fireman or a businessman or stuff that's typical from a child. And so these expectations never changed. And going into high school, I've always faced my parents and my grandparents thinking that I still want to be those things. And in reality, I found something else in animation secretly. I never told them that I found animation, I just did it by myself. So as college started to come around and we had to do college applications and all that, my parents found this place called College Planning ABC, which would help me register for applications and all that. And basically College Planning ABC helped me create the best possible application for college, and so that I would increase my chances of being accepted into places that I want to be accepted into. And then so in about March of junior year, I went to my first meeting at College Planning ABC with my parents. The guy there, he asked me, what do I want to be in life? And then my parents expected me to be a nurse or a comm sci engineer or something in the science industry, but I never told them that I wanted to be an animator. So I knew that eventually I would have to tell them. So I chose that day in College Planning ABC to tell my parents that I wanted to become an animator. They took it pretty well. I wouldn't say they were distraught at my choice, but they were hesitant at first. And then we went through the whole process of how do I apply and how do I search for schools that focus in animation and all that. And then later that day, we went home and I told my grandparents that I wanted to be an animator. And my granddad, he wasn't very welcoming to the idea. He always thought of me being like a scientist or like an astronaut or something. Very high expectations of a grandchild, of course, but he didn't really see me becoming an animator. So I just basically disregarded his opinions for a while. And so I continued to go to these College Planning ABC courses, which would help me write out my essays and my supplements and all that and complete my application in time, especially for early action, which I was there for. I actually found Chapman University through the facilitator at College Planning ABC. I never once heard of that school. When I was searching up for schools of animation, I found places like Loyola Marymount University, University of Southern California, and then UC Santa Cruz. So those were the schools I was looking at. But the facilitator there, he told me about Chapman University. And then I didn't really think much of it until he said that it was the best animation school that I could get into. And then so I did my research, I looked up Chapman University, and that's how I found it. And then eventually I was hooked on it. And then this all happened in March, so I had plenty of time to still process whether or not I was gonna apply there. But by the time June came around and I toured Chapman University, I knew that it was one of the places I wanted to be. And then so I did my application and all of that. I did the Common App, obviously. And then I applied for early action at LMU, Chapman, St. Mary's. I think USC was regular action, or regular decision, I mean. So I had to apply late, I guess. And I also applied to UC Santa Cruz, UC Davis, and UC Irvine. I knew I was gonna get into some colleges at least, so I just cruised through fall of my senior year. I would say that fall of senior year was pretty easy, but then again, I made it easy for myself, and then I was just waiting for the decisions from the colleges to come out. But in reality, even though I was waiting for college decisions to come out, I was really waiting for Chapman University. Like, I was awaiting the day when I would get the email from Chapman saying I got accepted. I got my acceptance letters in a certain order. I got St. Mary's first with a hefty scholarship, and then LMU waitlisted me, but then later accepted me. And then the third college to accept me was Chapman University. I remember that day so vividly because I was just so happy when I got that acceptance letter. I remember I was actually volunteering at the elementary in Morgan Hill for CSF, I think. CSF is a community service club that you could join to get community service hours for college. And then we were doing like a food drive or something at the school. And then I remember I left with my friend, and then we got gas and everything. And then I remember sitting in the parking lot of either a Chevron or a Shell, and then I looked into my email, and then I saw that I got an email from Chapman University. And it turned out that I was accepted. Just like Jack said, I opened up the email, and then just confetti blew up on the screen with such a nice note saying that, "Congrats, Justin Cole Bolayo, you were accepted into Chapman." But then finals were that week. And then I always struggled with calc. Even though I breezed through fall senior year, I was never good at calculus, and then I was struggling hard in that class. And then so the same day that I got my Chapman University admission letter, I actually found out that I failed calculus. As we know, you can't get into UC if you got a D in a class. And then obviously it's gonna be the same for private universities, where if you get a D in a class, you are in a bad spot. And so all of a sudden, one of the happiest days in my life turned into like this day of like freaking out because I just failed calculus. What am I supposed to do? I emailed the Bay Area counselor from Chapman University, and then I told her I got a D in calc. What do I do? She told me the obvious cookie cutter response that a counselor would give anyone about grades and all that. And then at the end of the email, she said, work your hardest and then make sure you put up a good face for yourself so that when we look at you again later, you aren't still a failure. But obviously she didn't say the failure part, that's more of like a subtext. While the rest of senior year went on, such as spring semester, while everyone slowed down, I was actually speeding up. And so I worked hard to make sure I get a good grade in calc. And eventually all that hard work paid off. I got a B in calc for spring semester, and then I was actually especially proud of when I actually got the highest grade on a calc test. And then I worked hard my entire spring semester of senior year. And then while everyone was just partying out there, and while everyone was just resting and having senioritis, I was making sure that I put up a good face for myself for when Chapman does look at me again, I at least have something to my name other than a D in calc. At the end of senior year, after transcripts were sent to all the universities that we applied to and got accepted into, I got a pretty harsh email from Chapman University saying that they acknowledged my B in calculus of spring of senior year, while I also had that D in first semester. And then for some reason, I don't know why they said this, but they said my response to this email would be imperative to my admission status at Chapman. So I guess they were asking how did I fix my grades, and then my response would affect my admission status. So I freaked out, and then I wrote this really complicated email about how I improved my grades in calculus and all that. And then after, they acknowledged my hard work again, and then they offered me like links to all these services at Chapman that would help me succeed. And at the end of the email, they said, congrats, you are now a Chapman student. I applied for the DA program, as we all know. When the summer was over, I went from a high school student that was struggling in calculus and that almost failed miserably because I got a D in calc. I went from that to a student at Chapman that's studying animation that I found basically just from being online. And so As a DA student, I've met some pretty incredible people here. I've met my suite mates, my roommates, Jack, Hunter, Hulu, Tori, Joey. I've met people like Michael Gribble, Hank Moss, along other people that for some reason I just love. And so I've met some incredible people here, and then I wouldn't have the opportunities that I have now if I didn't work so hard to get that B in Calc. To sum it up, I went from a stereotypical Filipino who should have been in the nursing industry or comp sci industry. Like, I had that expectation put on me from the very start. And then I kind of ran away from that and then chose animation instead, which my parents embraced, but my grandparents didn't. And eventually, when I thought I had everything planned out for myself, I failed calculus, which really put my position at Chapman in jeopardy. And then so I worked my butt off to improve my status as a student. I wouldn't say I've had the hardest obstacles that a student could face, but those two challenges of going against the stereotypes for Filipinos and the challenge of making sure Chapman doesn't reject me after admission, like, those challenges were probably the hardest things I've faced in my life. And then so something I've learned from it is, like, despite what people think, I should just continue to try and work my hardest to be an animator, because that's what I've chosen since, like, I first found animation in the first place. And then so there will be obstacles, there will be mountains, and there will be people who will try and put you down. And there will be so many things to try and stop you, but if you try your hardest, like I did, you'll eventually make it. Like, something that I usually think is, it doesn't matter how long it takes for me to get there, I know I'll eventually get there if I work my hardest. So I could be slow, or I could speed up in certain places, but if I work my hardest, I'll still get there. I worked my hardest by proving myself to Chapman, and then I worked my hardest by proving to myself that this was the place I wanted to be at. And so I worked my hardest and it all paid off. And then that's something that Jack says every day. If you work your hardest, you'll eventually make it. I guess that's it. But that's my story. And then my statement to you is, if you work your hardest, you'll eventually get there. And I guess, as always, be awesome.
Doing so well.
What's your score?
Oh, never mind. Oh, I'm 9 and 6. I'm better than I am.
It's positive.
Yeah, it's positive.